All right, I'm going to try to make this guidepost a little shorter than last week, but I don't think that's going to work because I've got a fairly complex thing that I want to talk about, which came up last Sunday night, which is this whole concept of loops. And to what degree is a relationship a loop? We talked about it as a container. Actually, I think the relationship itself is more of a dynamic system than this but how I define the relationship is a kind of container. In any case, the way we think about what's happening in the world, what is arising for us, we think through various kinds of templates or cognitive maps, ways of understanding things. My wife's been teaching preschool kids this week the concept of rhyme, and that various kinds of words rhyme. Very helpful in understanding poetry, but even in learning to read, to be able to see, oh, this is that same sound again. Our minds have various kinds of templates that we use to try to make sense of things. When I'm going to understand something, I'm going to, 2 plus 2, that always equals 4. So there's certain kinds of patterns or mental maps that we use to make sense of things. And one of the maps that I've been using more and more recently, as I've been trying to get my head around systems theory, is the whole concept of a loop. There are different kinds of loops. One of the ones that's common is the feedback loop that we get, an audio feedback loop when you get the microphone too close to the speaker. Because it reproduces itself until it reaches a limit of the system in this horrible screech, right? So that is a kind of feedback loop. There's lots of kinds of feedback loops. We have feedback loops in our bodies. My body feeds back information so that I know how much sugar to have in my blood and what my heart rate should be and oxygen. So all kinds of adjustments that go on, just like we adjust the temperature in the room with a thermostat, set the thermostat, and the system in a loop recreates that temperature and adjusts dynamically to what's actually happening within the system. So whatever the scale of the system, there are certain loops that construct a kind of dynamic experience. But we think of things as dynamic only when we can actually see how quickly they're changing. Some things change. We can see that they've changed, but we don't really notice the change. It's like when I look at the back of my hand, the skin on my hand, I don't see it changing. But it sure looks different than it used to, when it looks different than it did when I was 7 years old, right? Sometimes we can cut ourselves, and I watch the cut, and I could see over the course of several days, the cut heals, which is evidence of my skin being a dynamic system. Now, sometimes the cut is so great that what's left is not restoration of the skin perfectly, but there's a scar there. That something about the trauma to the system ended up changing the system such that there's a kind of permanent or semi-permanent structure that arises there. So we are a part of, as humans within the larger cultural system, we are creating various loops as we participate in them. One of my favorite examples of this is a loop which is was an art installation over at the St. Louis Art Museum. And as you can see here, it's like this plexiglass cylinder. There's a pump down here at the bottom. There's the tube that carries the water up to the top, pushes it. I don't know that it's water, but it probably is. It seems to be about that viscosity. But the combination of the viscosity of the water, the flow of the pump, and the dimensions of the container allow for this dynamic loop to form, which is that you can see the whirlpool that's happening within the midst of this system. Right? So there are ways in which we are the fluid within the larger container of human society, and there are certain loops that we create together, certain whirlpools that we create. Language keeps changing, right? But language is something that is constructed by the interaction of each of us as we speak to each other. law, culture, music. There's lots of different phenomena that arise, the market, the economy, that happen because of the interaction of all of us creating it. And it's not something that you or I created. I didn't create the market. I didn't create language, right? But it exists because of our interaction with this. Now, some of what we experience within the body, within the loops within the body, are evidence of scars, of trauma that has happened. And a particularly vivid example of that for us in American culture now is the scar of racism. I didn't create that. You didn't create that. None of us really, like most of us, don't want it. There's a few people who think it somehow helps them to have racial segregation in some way. But mostly as a society, we're growing out of that. We are maturing away from that. Scar is bit by bit healing. The question is there something I can do to help the scar heal? Can I notice when it is that what I'm doing, in fact, reinforces that loop? Not consciously. I don't intend that. That's not what I want. But if I'm going to live with intention, though, I want to notice when I'm participating in the construction of a cultural loop that is, in fact, something that I want to deconstruct. I hope this is some grist for the mill in our conversation Sunday night. See you then.